This is China's last decade. China is the fastest aging society in human history. That means from a demographic point of view, the Chinese economic model cannot survive the decade. And it strongly suggests that as soon as 2050, the Chinese may have lost 600 million people. I don't worry about China at all. The after effects of China's collapse, that I'm concerned about a little bit. Because it means that the workshop of the world and all its productive capacity could just three big things. First of all, Chairman Xi has created a cult of personality that is so extreme, and he has shot the messenger literally so many times that no one wants to bring him any information. I mean, this is worse than what's going on with Putin. Putin insists that he is lied to, and will get rid of anyone who tells him the truth. No one even wants to approach Chairman Xi because they have no idea what's going on in his head and how whatever fact they give him is going to play to the chorus. He has consolidated more power to himself than any leader in world history. More than Mao, more than the Chinese emperors of old, more than the Kim dynasty in North Korea, more than Donald Trump, more than anyone. And as a result, we're seeing policy collapses across the entire system. The two most dramatic, we had power outages that started last March. It's apparent that Xi didn't know they happened until September. We didn't get a policy to deal with it until November, and they're only now getting patched up. And of course, the other one is COVID. Now, we're in Texas. I'm going to assume there's a diversity of opinions on natural immunity versus vaccines. But I think in the quiet of our own homes in the dark, we will admit to ourselves at least that the other side may have a couple of relevant points. Right? Is that fair? In China, neither of these are options. Natural immunity isn't an option because the Chinese have, until now, fairly successfully kept COVID out of the population, so no one has natural immunity. From the vaccine side, the Chinese vaccines don't work. They worked barely against the original wild strain out of Wuhan. And everyone in China has pretty much got that now. But then we had Alpha and Beta and now Omicron, Delta, ThreatCon, Fuchsia 7, or wherever we are now. And they don't work at all. So if China were to open, you're talking about 2 to 5 million deaths a month for at least 6 months. And in a cult of personality system where the buck literally stops with the top guy, that is a regime-ending event. So lockdowns are their only option. We got about 90 million Chinese under hard lockdown right now, and about another 250 million under soft lockdown. You can't run a modern economy like that. The Germans are in recession because of energy. I would say that the Chinese would be in recession because of energy if they weren't in recession already because of COVID. So this is going to be the situation until the Chinese can catch up with a better vaccine that is domestically produced, because they've spent the last 2.5 years saying that the American ones make you magnetic and infertile. So they're not going to import them. By the way, if you believe those things, that's Chinese propaganda. If you think they're going to rewrite your DNA, that's Russian propaganda. Next crisis. 3 years ago, the Chinese had an outbreak of something called African swine fever. It's basically Ebola for pigs. Doesn't communicate to humans, thank God, but messy. They say they wiped it out. If you look at a heat map of where cases are in East Asia, all of Chinese borders are raging with ASF, but there's not a single case within China. Yeah, right. In an information-controlled system that is a cult of personality that is having a medical crisis and flirting with an energy crisis, one of the few remaining pillars of legitimacy is food supply. The chances that they're going to lose pork again are pretty high. The last time they had to wipe out 2/3 of their herd. All that's left in that situation is rice. Rice is the most phosphate-demanding crop humans grow. China is the world's largest supplier. They've shut their borders to exports. So just on top of everything with Ukraine, we're also have lost one of the largest things that allow us to keep 8 billion people alive. This is the USS Ford. This is our newest supercarrier, most powerful military platform humans have ever built. By itself, one Ford class can take on any but the top 7 air forces in the world. That assumes the Navy fights fair. The Navy never fights fair. The whole idea of the Navy is the ships can move, so you get to choose the time and the place of the conflict, which means it's not really the top 7, it's just the top 3 that a Ford couldn't beat, and one of those is ours. We're building 4 of these to complement our pre-existing 10 Nimitz-class supercarriers. You want to knock off a country, this is the tool for the job. You want to patrol the global sea lanes to make commerce safe? Oh my God, this is a horrible choice because there's only 4 of them. They can only be in 4 places at a time. Instead, you need these bad boys, destroyers. You need hundreds of them, probably 800 to patrol the global sea lanes. We have 70. Even if the United States wanted to be the guarantor of global commerce, we no longer have the capacity. Western Hemisphere, sure. But the rest of the world, forget it. This is a straight-up population density map by state and province. The 2 quadrants in the west and the quadrant in the lower right, those 3 quadrants of the world are net exporters of food and energy and minerals. The remaining one, the top right, is a net importer of everything. In fact, you can narrow it down. This circle is a net importer of everything, and the rest of the world is a net exporter. The country that is most dependent on the US Navy to keep everything safe and flowing freely is China. Now, people talk about the Chinese having a big navy, 600 ships. Yes, that is relevant, but only about 60 of them can sail more than 1,000 miles from shore. And that assumes they're going slow and in a straight line to save fuel. In combat conditions, they can only go about 350 miles. At current rates of naval build-out, China will be able to displace the US Navy around the year 2450. I don't want to burn a lot of brain power on worrying about this one. The Chinese do, and they should. Because everything that's going down in the world today from a security point of view is a direct threat to not just their potential rise, but to their very existence. Okay, back to your world. This is total investment into all oil and all gas from all state and all private sources. Back in 2014, at its peak, a narrative took hold on the world's financial capitals. Fossil fuels are done. And since it takes 5 to 15 years to break even on a project and 3 to 8 years to bring it online, why in the world would you throw your money away when you know that by 2035 it's going to be gone anyway? Now, there's a lot of things about that train of thought that are derailed in my opinion, but it took hold in Tokyo and Paris and in New York. And overall investment into the space plummeted. 3 to 8 years to bring a project online. Keep that. Because it's not the same everywhere. This is one of my favorite graphic sequences. This is what I like to call the checkbook map, because everyone with a dot paid their power bill. Here are the world's conventional oil and gas basins. Pay particular attention to North America and the Persian Gulf, because here's where the shale is. There's a dozen major reasons why US shale is fundamentally different from energy anywhere else and of any other kind. But for today's discussion, this is by far the most important. We produce it where we live and no one else does. You can have a collapse of the global transport system and we're broadly okay. Now, for those of you who are with the super majors and have projects the world over, it's a long and complicated story that really matters upon where you are. But here, it looks pretty good. Also, 3 to 8 years to bring on a conventional system. Here it's like 3 to 8 weeks for a shale well. Now, I realize that's back in 2019, before we have this everything in shortage economy. And now we have shortages of labor and steel and pumps and everything else. It's more like 3 to 8 months now, but still, order of magnitude better than what everybody else has to deal with. So you know that even if the Ukraine war ended tomorrow, the volatility in the price environment that we're in right now is going to take a minimum of 3 years to fix, assuming nothing else goes wrong. You see that China kind of has that one spike that looks promising. Remember, their population is roughly 4 times the size of ours, so that one spike really matters, if it exists. The Chinese have been updating their data in the last couple of years. They still haven't released their 2020 census because they couldn't believe what came back. They're now starting to believe it, and they now think that they overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people, all of whom were born since the one-child policy was adopted 40 years ago, suggesting that those yellow bars don't exist at all. If this is true, China is the fastest aging society in human history. That means from a demographic point of view, the Chinese economic model cannot survive the decade. And it strongly suggests that as soon as 2050, the Chinese may have lost 600 million people. I don't worry about China at all. The after effects of China's collapse